All right, thanks for everybody for coming. It's 10:05, and I know we don't have a lot of transition time between our talks, so might as well go ahead and get going if that's cool with you guys. Hey, thanks for coming. So I'm excited about this talk. So who am I? My name is Crispin Reedy. I'm a voice user interaction designer, and I'm the head of user interface design at a company called Versailles Solutions. We're a consulting company out of Chicago. We're interested in voice, customer experience, and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So I've been working in this field for about 10, 15 years, and I want to also make a plug for my other hat, which is the Association for Conversational Interaction Design. Now, we just rebranded. We used to be the Association for Voice Interaction Design, and that is the professional organization for voice user interface designers. It's been around for about 10 years, and so I would really encourage you, if you are a designer or if you know somebody who is a designer, to pass that along to them. We've got a lot of really great resources out on our website for design education around voice, such as presentations, brown bags, wiki, a lot of good conversations around standards and best practices and all that kind of stuff. So please look us up, or if you'd like to get involved, because we're always looking for people to speak and help, hit me up afterwards. So what is this session about? I always like to try and keep myself honest by putting the description of the session here in the PowerPoint. So who are the power users of voice technology? Get to know them. So this is a small-scale qualitative remote interview study that we did with these users, small group. What are their experiences so far? What are they doing that's interesting or usual? What do they like to change? And the reason behind why we wanted to do this study was really just kind of to see what's out there. You know, what's going on? What are these new users doing? What are they playing with? What's fun and unusual out there, right? So first of all, what is the definition of a power user, right? Is this somebody who is putting a lot of mental energy into it? Is it somebody who's putting a lot of time into it? So for the purposes of our study, these were our criteria. Owns and regularly uses more than one voice-enabled device, uses the assistant on the phone, installed and uses skills and actions, home automation setup, and then last one, kind of the wild card, I tinker with my voice setup, right? Something like that. And for contrast, this is kind of what we were not wanting to get, right, is the I'm sure y'all are all familiar with this PricewaterhouseCoopers study that came out in the spring, right? It was the Intelligence Series Voice Assistant Survey, and the headline kind of says it all, right? Despite growing capabilities, basic tasks remain the norm. So if you look at the chart they've got here up at the top, you know, is basic search that a lot of people are doing, and down at the bottom are more smart home automation, control, things like that. And this is a really great study, by the way. If you guys haven't seen it, just Google the PwC Consumer Intelligence Series Voice Assistant Survey, and there's a lot of good stuff in that survey. So what was our methodology? Who do we want to talk to? Small scale, qualitative study, right? Not really interested in a big survey. PwC can do that, but can talk to people one-on-one and really get a sense of who they are and what they're dealing with. So just 14 participants. And again, it's a little bit of an unusual data set, right? This is not the general public, but that was the point, right? We recruited them using tech websites and blogs. They are self-described power users. We did the scheduling and the incentive payment via Ethneo, and I want to shout out to them, by the way. They were very helpful through the whole process. This is the first time we'd used them, and in terms of actually like getting the time set up for the session, and in terms of getting the incentive, they get an A+. This next bullet point kind of goes back to what the NPR folks were talking about how to do remote testing, because this was a remote session, right? And we did want to see them use their devices. And so let's try web conferencing, right? So we use the web conferencing app Zoom for a couple reasons. Number one, it's got a very easy to install app that you can install on either the iPhone or Android free app. The installation goes very well, and it's very easy to use. But what we did find out, unfortunately, is that bandwidth with the video was a real consideration for these users. Even for the ones who had a high quality network in their home, the video would tend to degrade the audio. So what we wound up doing with this, and actually the video was not all that interesting either. I mean, I got a lot of video of people saying, here's a lamp, Alexa, turn off the light, and the light goes off. So, so I didn't bring you any video or audio because of that. But I will say that the audio quality was decent, but the video was not really quite so much. So our 14 participants that we did go out and talk to, and we did get some really good quotes, though, and some fun stuff. So we rolled up those 14 participants into these composite representative users. And so our first one is our baseline, right? Beth, she's our non-power user. She was not in the 14. So really it's a sample of 15, right? But she kind of represents that PricewaterhouseCoopers standard that we saw earlier of sort of a generalist type of user, right? A sort of a baseline. Then we had a few participants that fell into what we would call the category of Greg generalist, right? A little bit more of a not so much of a power user as we thought. And I'll talk more about him later because he's interesting. A lot of people fall into what we call the tinkerer archetype. And then we had one that was really interesting that came straight out of an old school X10 background of automation. I was home automation before home automation was cool kind of guy. So it was fun to hear what he had to say. And he's definitely an outlier, but it was very interesting to watch how these guys talked about their experiences. So let's talk a little bit about Beth. One of her quotes, I got started using Siri. I still use her a lot in the car, mostly for texts, because I have the hands-free button where you can just press it and send the text. So that was really where her heavy use was at. So again, this was our baseline user. She had an Alexa. She uses Siri. She does see herself as an early adopter, and she actually did even install skills. But she said, you know, I would install skills, and then I would forget about them. So she does a lot of what we would think of as the standard usage of Siri. You know, the music, reminders, timers, no shopping, did not want anything to do with shopping. I want to see the item, she said, and dabbled with skills a little bit. She did say, I'd probably miss Siri the most since I text all the time in my car using her. So that's an interesting pointer to kind of the difference, the slightly different usage between the car and the home assistant, right? She did have one kind of fun usage, which I picked up on, which is she only has the one device, but she would use the remote as a secondary device, and she would use, you know how if you have multiple devices, you can set them up with the intercom setup. Well, she kind of did the lo-fi intercom setup. So she had her device in one room, and she wanted to yell at her kids in that room. So she would use the remote and use the Simon Says functionality for Alexa. You know, so Simon says, Tommy, stop yelling at your sister. And then Alexa would repeat that in the other room. So I kind of thought that was an amusing little new usage of, you know, it's not quite the intercom. So that's our Beth. But now Greg, and I'm going to come back to him a little bit because this was the user that I did not expect to find. Okay, Greg was actually a little bit disappointed in the technology. And I want you to bear in mind that this is a self-selected power user coming from things like tech blogs and forums, right? He said things like, I've been a little bit disappointed about how hard it was to set up. Things like individually, the cost barrier is low, but a fully automated system is more expensive. This guy typically had a lot of stuff, right? This is what we were selecting for. His pattern was he would get involved. This was exclusively Amazon users. I did not see any Google users in this group. But he would get involved with the voice ecosystem, typically from a sale. Hey, the Dot is $20. Let's pick one up, you know? And then, hey, this other light is $20. Let's pick one of those up. And then he would start to try and put things together. So he did have much heavier usage than Beth, right? Because, again, we're seeing typical, you know, music, reminders, timers, and now you start to get into a little bit of the cooking. I did see different types of devices, the Dot, the Show. I think one of them had the Tap, the mobile one. The show, actually, by the way, so who here has a show? Anybody have a show? Okay, so let me ask you this. Is your show in the kitchen? Yeah, yes. No. So you are an outlier. Of these people, every single person who had a show had it in the kitchen. So where is your show? In the bedroom. Okay. So do you cook much at all? Okay. See, this is what I found very interesting. The people who had the show and who cooked with it, they were like all about having it in the kitchen and using it to cook with. It was a really kind of an interesting to see how and some of them were like, yeah, I'm cooking a lot more, which is interesting. Not a lot of shopping. Some shopping. For this group, it wasn't so much a barrier about wanting to see the stuff as it was availability of shopping in their area and their comfort with shopping on Alexa in general. But again, this group is a little bit more shy or not as interested or not as enchanted with the technologies I expected. He said things like, Harmony Hub, that was great for the TV, but after that, I started to get into a little trouble. There are some things I haven't quite worked out yet. So interesting. So I'll come back to this guy. So Tom Tinkerer, this was my main archetype. This was most of the people who are represented in the study. And this guy was like, this is my hobby. This is fun. I like voice. And these people went out and sought voice first, and then that really heavily drove the home automation. And I'll tell you what, it heavily drove the home automation, right? These guys had lights, they had security, they had locks, they had fans, they had the garage door, they had camera, they had multiple hubs. One of them even had a sous vide cooker, okay? The voice-enabled sous vide cooker. I did not know that there was a skill for the ANOVA, by the way, it's interesting. So, but yeah, if I can find something that works with Alexa, I'll buy it. I'm gonna change over everything in my house. I am a voice true believer. I did have one person who was a little bit of a subgroup of the Tinkerer, and I had a developer. He kind of snuck in. I wasn't really looking for developers, but it wasn't his day job. He did this on the side, kind of as his gig, and his attitude was 90% similar to Tom Tinkerer, except he took a little bit more professional attitude toward it. So he actually came to it from developing apps for Android and then switched over to voice. He had a lot of nice things to say about the Google ecosystem. And that actually brings me to my next point, which is that these guys here were the ones who were more interested in the Google ecosystem. My general sample, pretty much all of them had an Alexa, but these guys were the ones who had an Alexa first, and then the Google device came out and they went out and bought one because they wanted to play with it. And of the ones who went out and bought a Google device, pretty much all of them then went ahead and switched that to be their primary device because they just felt that it was more useful and more fun for them to use. Again, remember who we're talking about now, Tinkerer, right? So these guys, you get a lot of heavy use of scenes and routines, some programming, even not the developer, but there was a couple of them who were developing their own skills. This research was done prior to Amazon's putting out the roll your own skill thing, right? So you actually had to be a lot of a developer to do it. And a couple of them had done that insofar as one of them had a pirate name generator, and he actually went so far as to deploy it all the way out on the skill store. And he was not the full-time developer, he was a hobbyist. And then one of them had a game about raising the baby. He had written this for his children, and he wanted them to be able to, and he said, yeah, we played it really heavily for about a month, and then we forgot about it. But I think the interesting thing about this group to me is that they had a lot to say about voice technology. That's the brain there. They're thinking about this. One of them said to me, the Echo is always pull, it's not push. You won't be sitting in the living room and it'll say your package has arrived. It turns on the little light. It will never interrupt you. And I think that's a smart thing. So this group is actually thinking about voice. So some of the things that this group was doing, well, one of them, these guys are, they're like completists maybe, I got the feeling. I mean, they'd really been thinking about automating everything in their house. They wanted to do everything that they could do. So the one guy said, yeah, I ceiling mounted a dot in my bathroom. And he's like, it doesn't really get that much use, but I wanted to do every single room. And I'm just like, ceiling mounted dot. I mean, I immediately thought of this. And I'm not going to make that joke, but anyway. So the ceiling mounted dot, that was one. One of them was really neat. They had a Fire TV. The child had a Fire TV in their room. And then the parents, in order to summon their child to dinner, would just turn off their kid's TV by saying, Alexa, turn off Tommy's TV. And the kid would come to dinner. And so this was a signal in their household for the kid to come to dinner. And then the last one that had done the most, what you might call hacking, was this dash button hacker. And so it's interesting because it was not entirely about voice, but it kind of more in the home automation world. So this guy somehow, apparently there was a special on the internet, and he got a whole bunch of dash buttons for practically almost nothing. And so he started figuring out how he could apply these dash buttons to everything in his house. He basically used them as a low quality or cheap switch that he could hack everywhere. And so in the automation world, this is what I found really interesting. He had a small child in his household, and he had some scenes built around the baby's nursery. So, lights at 25% red hue to avoid waking up the baby, right? And when he went into the child's room, he didn't want to say this aloud because he didn't want to wake up the baby. So one of the things that he did with a dash button is he hacked the dash button to then map this voice command to the dash button so that he could walk in the baby's nursery, press the dash button, and it would cue up the scene that he wanted without him having to speak. So I thought that was a really interesting use. And he did a lot of other things with the dash buttons in terms of counting things around the house, again, having to do with the baby. Like he wanted to keep a log of all the times that the baby was fed and if the baby was changed. I know, a little bit OCD, but hey, whatever works. But it kind of got my juices going thinking about all the times that people log stuff, right? Think about people who are on diets, logging their calories, or on exercise, right? Okay, Fitbit, logging my steps, right? And so it really kind of made me think that there is maybe this need out there for some kind of generic logging that is maybe, you didn't have to do all this work. I mean, he had to write a Perl script to have it run on his server, and he had to hack the button so it would pick up the broadcast, and then it would write off to a Google spreadsheet. But, it makes me wonder, is there some kind of need for easy, configurable logging that is not quite so, that's generic, that's not so tied to something, but that could be a little bit more accessible maybe than what he did. So that was something that I thought was pretty interesting. So then finally I get to Oscar Old School. Now this guy was kind of fun. I mean, this was kind of like, I was home automation before home automation was cool. I mean, he was like, yeah, this X10 where you connect everything and all the signals go through the wiring in your house. And so then they got the Echo when it came online because it connected to all of the stuff that they already have. So this guy had everything. I mean, this was by far the most complicated home automation setup that anyone had discussed with me because he had been doing this for 15 years, right? So, he had 5 dots. He had a show. He had Z-Wave throughout the house. He had locked security cameras. He had complete audio-visual integration. Most of these people at this point run servers, okay? Multiple zones, multiple scenes, multiple routines. And the Echo was something that was really important to him because it was cheap. He'd already been used to buying this home automation stuff that was fairly inexpensive anyway. And, it was also important because he could do all of the scenes and the routines. They also did a lot of shopping, right? And there's shopping specifically for dog food. But it's like anything that you had to buy repeatedly, paper towels, toilet paper, things like that. But he had a really funny little story to tell about shopping. He had the show in the kitchen, And he said, with the show, when you buy something, you have to actually press a button to confirm your purchase. And he's like, I don't want to touch a screen. What's the point of that? So when he wanted to buy something, he would walk into the living room and buy it on the dot. So I was like, okay, that's an interesting little behavior that I bet people hadn't thought of before. Now, this guy had a really interesting attitude towards the technology. He is like, wow, it's amazing how easy the voice technology is. No setup, it just works. And when Amazon went down, life was really difficult for us because some of our lights don't even have switches. So this guy is like so steeped in the tinkering. And okay, I will say this. He's also, those Christmas light displays, we were talking about this, that you wire up in your house and they dance around. He had one of those, okay? So this is somebody who is way far up the scale on tinkering with lights, electricity, home automation, things like that. So from his standpoint, the Alexa was just crazy easy to use. No setup at all. So 10:26, okay, 4 minutes. All right, so I just have a few general observations for you and then just a little bit of a conclusion. So I asked these guys about security and privacy, and you know what? It was kind of not an issue for them. It was an interesting reaction. They said things like, nobody's listening. They said things like, it's aggregated data. I would be really boring to spy on anyway. This next one's a good one. I'm willing to give up data in exchange for convenience, and I'm good with that. Or this one, I trust Google more than the government. The more information they have, the better they can assist you. So these guys have no problem with that aspect of it. Now, some of them did have a little bit of a problem with things like credit cards, one of them, smart locks, a couple of them, and cameras in the home, right? That was the three were like, yeah. One of them was like, I really want a camera set up, but I want to be able to keep everything local because that's something that I'm really not comfortable with is the video instead of the audio. Another thing that I asked them all, just to kind of see what they would say, I asked, does your device have a personality? And it was very mixed. Some of them were like, yeah, she definitely does. And they'd use the pronoun. And some of them were like, nope, this is just a machine. And then one of them was very funny about his response. He was very resistant. He said things like, I'm intentionally trying not to develop an emotional relationship with it because that's what they want you to do. They want you to buy in on it. No, you're a tool, and I'm going to use you as a tool. You're not going to be a member of the family. So he was very much like, I see this is going on, but I'm not going to buy in on it. Okay, so just a few final observations. First of all, looking back again at my participants, right? Beth, Greg, Tom, Oscar. So these are all self-selected, right? Except for Beth, our control. But I do want to point out something about the demographic here that I'm drawing on, right? This is the tech demographic that is very comfortable with technology because that's where they came from. And this demographic, again, this was representative of who they are. They were all guys, and they were, mostly younger. Some of them were older, but I kind of want to point that out. I don't have any remedies or conclusions about that, but I do want to point that out in terms of what's going on in terms of wider audiences, right? And another observation I made, and this goes back to Greg again, right, is friction, right? So friction in getting this fancy setup, friction in putting these skills together, friction in plugging these devices in, right? So if I look at the perceived friction across each of these personas, Beth didn't perceive any friction because she really wasn't trying to do a whole lot, right? She had her little universe that she was living in. She had her little skills, one or two skills. She had her, timers and her Siri, and she was happy with that. So she perceives very little friction, and she's happy with it. Greg was unhappy because he was trying to do more, and he can't. Right? So he perceived a lot of friction and he was unhappy with it. Tom perceived almost as much friction as Greg, right? Tom was like, yeah, sometimes this is hard to do. Sometimes it is not a casual type of thing, but this is my hobby, so it's fun and I'm used to it and I'm interested in that kind of thing. And then, our Oscar Old School over here, so far off the curve, he didn't perceive any friction at all, and he was happy with it. So I keep coming back to Greg here and the friction that is stopping him from doing what he wants to do, which is to adopt a larger, home automation system and do a lot more with this technology. And one of our Toms actually said this to me. He said, whatever the problem is, I find that tinkerers online will find a way to go around it. And that's where their name came from, what? Tinkerers. Someone like me, I'm happy to spend a few hours fooling around, but if you want wide adoption, you have to not do that. So I thought that was an interesting, and if I was to look at next steps, I would say, go back to the Gregs and say, all right, specifically what is blocking you and what is the roadmap forward to get the Gregs moving beyond all of this to where they want to go. And so here's my contact information. And again, I want to put on a plug for Association for Conversational Interaction Design, or if you're interested in talking to me about my day job, Versailles, and any questions in the, -1 minute we have. Yes.
Yes. Are you planning to do this study with the next wave? This is, the all early adopters. Are you planning to do this again with the early mainstream?
That's an interesting question. Right now, we don't have any immediate plans to do a follow-up on this study, but that would be a really good follow-up study to do, right? Because to see how do these, and in this, so things are changing fast, but this is not that old, right? This was only done a little longer. This was done back in February, so it was done before the release of the Apple HomePod. But it would be interesting to keep going with this and see how it gets out there.